The church was suffocating, its stained glass windows trapping the weight of grief like a vice around Harrison's chest. He sat in the front pew, staring at the polished oak casket, its surface gleaming under the soft light, mocking the void it held. His best friend, Caleb, was gone, taken by a car accident so sudden it felt like the universe had played a cruel joke. Harrison had always been the quiet one, in his family of loud voices and louder opinions. He was the shadow in the corner, the one who listened, nodded, and kept his truths buried deep. Growing up in the small town of Willow Creek, Virginia, he learned early that silence was safer than speaking. His father, a retired Marine, preached discipline and tradition. His mother, a devout churchgoer, clung to Scripture like a lifeline. Harrison, with his gentle hazel eyes and disarming smile, was their golden boy, perfect on the surface, but a storm of secrets within. He met Caleb in freshman year of high school, a lanky kid with a grin that could light up a room and a knack for getting into trouble. Caleb was everything Harrison wasn't: bold, unapologetic, and fiercely himself. They bonded over late-night video games and stolen sips of cheap whiskey, their friendship a refuge from the world's expectations. By senior year, Harrison knew it was more than friendship. The way his heart raced when Caleb laughed, the way his skin burned when their shoulders brushed, it was a truth he couldn't name. Not in Willow Creek. Now, at 25, Harrison sat in that pew, surrounded by Caleb's family, his own parents, in a town that had never really known either of them. The preacher's voice droned on, but Harrison's mind was elsewhere, replaying the last time he saw Caleb. It was 2 weeks ago, at a bar in Richmond. Caleb had been vibrant, his blonde hair catching the neon lights, his blue eyes sparkling with mischief. "You gotta live, Harry," he'd said, slinging an arm around Harrison's shoulders. "Stop hiding who you are." Harrison hadn't answered. He just smiled, sipped his beer, and changed the subject. That was his way to deflect, distract, disappear. But now, with Caleb's absence carving a hole in his chest, he wondered if silence had been the wrong choice. The service ended, and the preacher called for eulogies. Caleb's sister spoke first, her voice breaking as she shared memories of their childhood. Friends followed, their words heavy with love and loss. Then, silence fell. Eyes turned to Harrison. He hadn't planned to speak. He'd told himself he'd stay quiet, as always. But something in him snapped, a dam breaking under the weight of years. He stood, legs trembling, and walked to the podium. The church held its breath. His parents watched, their faces unreadable. Harrison gripped the podium, his knuckles white, and looked at the casket. "Caleb," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "You were my home." The words spilled out, raw and unfiltered. He spoke of their adventures, their late-night talks, the way Caleb made him feel alive. Then, his voice cracked. "I loved him," he said, the confession tearing through the silence like a gunshot. "Not just as a friend. I loved him with everything I had, and I never told him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. His mother's hand flew to her mouth, his father's jaw tightened. Harrison didn't care. For the first time, he felt free. "I'm gay," he said, louder now, his voice steadying. And Caleb knew. He was the only one who ever really saw me. The church was a sea of stunned faces. But Harrison kept going. He spoke of Caleb's courage, his laughter, his unwavering belief in living authentically. "He deserved to hear it from me," Harrison said, tears streaming down his face. "And now he never will." When he finished, the silence was deafening. He stepped down, heart pounding, and walked out of the church, leaving whispers in his wake. The air outside was crisp, the autumn leaves crunching under his feet. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Harrison drove to Richmond that night, needing distance from Willow Creek's judgment. He checked into a cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and threadbare carpets. Lying on the stiff bed, he stared at the ceiling, replaying his confession. It wasn't just about Caleb, it was about himself, about finally claiming the truth he'd buried for years. His phone buzzed with messages from his parents, his sister, even old classmates. Some were kind, others cruel. His mother's text was a single line, "We need to talk." He didn't reply. Instead, he thought of Caleb's words, "Stop hiding." Harrison wasn't sure he knew how to do that, but he wanted to try. The next morning, he wandered into a coffee shop in Richmond's Fan District, a vibrant area where rainbow flags hung proudly in windows. He ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching couples stroll by, men holding hands, women laughing together, people living openly. It felt like a different world from Willow Creek. A man approached his table, carrying a sketchbook and a latte. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice warm. He was in his mid-20s, with sun-kissed blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that reminded Harrison of Caleb, though softer, less mischievous. He wore a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, his style effortlessly cool. "Sure," Harrison said, surprised by his own openness. The man introduced himself as Ethan, an artist who'd moved to Richmond after college. They talked for hours about art, music, and the weight of small-town expectations. Ethan was out and proud, his confidence magnetic. "I saw you at the funeral," Ethan admitted. "You were brave up there." Harrison flushed. "Or stupid." "No," Ethan said, smiling. "Brave. It's not easy to stand up like that." Their conversation flowed easily, and when Ethan suggested they grab dinner later, Harrison agreed without hesitation. It was the first time he'd said yes to something or someone without second-guessing himself. That night, over burgers and beers at a cozy diner, Ethan shared his own story. He'd grown up in a conservative suburb, faced rejection from his family, but found a chosen family in Richmond's queer community. "You don't have to do it alone," Ethan said, his hand brushing Harrison's across the table. The touch sent a jolt through him, unfamiliar but exhilarating. For the next few days, Harrison and Ethan spent every moment together. They walked along the James River, visited art galleries, and shared quiet moments in Ethan's tiny apartment. Harrison felt himself opening up, piece by piece, like a flower unfurling after a long winter. But the shadow of Caleb's death lingered, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd failed to say. One evening, as they sat on Ethan's balcony, watching the city lights, Harrison confessed his guilt. "I should have told Caleb how I felt," he said, his voice thick. "I owed him that." Ethan listened, his eyes gentle. "You're telling him now, in your own way. Living your truth, that's what he'd want." Harrison nodded. tears stinging his eyes. For the first time, he felt like he could forgive himself. He reached for Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwining, and in that moment, he knew he was ready to start again. Harrison woke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through Ethan's curtains. The warmth of their shared bed, a stark contrast to the cold motel room he'd left behind. For the first time in weeks, he hadn't dreamed of Caleb's casket. Instead, he dreamed of laughter, of hands brushing against his, of a future that didn't feel like a betrayal. Ethan stirred beside him, his blonde hair a mess, his smile sleepy but genuine. "Morning," he murmured, his voice a low hum that made Harrison's heart skip. They lingered in bed, talking about nothing and everything, until the reality of the day crept in. Harrison's phone buzzed again, another message from his mother. "Please come home. We love you." He stared at the words, torn between guilt and defiance. Ethan noticed, his hand resting gently on Harrison's shoulder. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "Give yourself time." But time felt like a luxury Harrison didn't have. Willow Creek was a small town, and his confession at the funeral had spread like wildfire. He could already imagine the whispers at church, the sidelong glances at the grocery store. Part of him wanted to stay in Richmond forever, wrapped in Ethan's world, where he could be himself without fear. But another part knew he couldn't run from his past. That afternoon, Harrison agreed to meet his sister, Lily, at a park halfway between Richmond and Willow Creek. She was 2 years older, a nurse with a sharp wit and a heart too big for their small town. When he arrived, she was waiting on a bench, her dark hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "I'm proud of you," she said without preamble, pulling him into a hug. "But you've got Mom and Dad in a tailspin." Harrison sighed, sitting beside her. "I didn't mean to hurt them. I couldn't keep lying." Lily nodded, her eyes soft. "They're not mad, Harry. They're scared. They don't know how to handle this." He told her about Ethan, about the spark he felt, the freedom of being seen. Lily listened, her smile growing. "He sounds good for you," she said. "But you need to talk to Mom and Dad. They deserve to hear it from you, not the town gossip." Harrison knew she was right, but the thought of facing his parents made his stomach churn. They'd always been loving, but their love came with expectations, marriage, kids, a life that fit their mold. He wasn't sure they could accept him as he was. Back in Richmond, Ethan invited Harrison to a queer community event at a local art gallery. The space was alive with color, paintings, sculptures, and photographs celebrating love in all its forms. Harrison felt a pang of awe as he watched people move freely, unburdened by shame. Ethan introduced him to friends, a mix of artists, activists, and dreamers, each with their own story of struggle and triumph. One of them, a trans woman named Maya, shared her journey of coming out to her religious family. "It's not about changing them overnight," she said, her voice steady. "It's about showing them you're still you, just braver." Her words stuck with Harrison. That night, as he and Ethan walked home under a starlit sky, he made a decision. "I'm going back to Willow Creek," he said. "I need to face them." Ethan squeezed his hand. "I'll be here when you get back." The drive to Willow Creek felt like a journey to another life. The familiar streets, the old oak trees, the church steeple looming in the distance, it all felt smaller, less imposing. We pulled into his parents' driveway. His mother was waiting on the porch, her eyes red from crying. "Harrison," she said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us?" He took a deep breath, the weight of years pressing against his chest. "I was afraid you wouldn't love me anymore." She pulled him into a hug, her tears soaking his shirt. "You're my son," she whispered. "Nothing changes that." His father was harder to read, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. They sat in the living room, the silence heavy. Finally, his father spoke. "I don't understand it," he said gruffly. "But I don't want to lose you." It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a start. Harrison told them about Caleb, about the love he'd kept hidden, about Ethan and the life he was beginning to build. His mother listened, her hand clutching his. His father stayed quiet, but his eyes softened, just a fraction. When Harrison left, he felt lighter, like he'd shed a layer of armor. He drove back to Richmond, the road stretching out like a promise. Ethan was waiting at his apartment, a bottle of wine and a playlist of soft jazz ready. They talked until midnight, their laughter mingling with the music, and Harrison realized he was falling, not just for Ethan, but for the person he was becoming. The weeks that followed were a blur of discovery. Harrison spent his days with Ethan, exploring Richmond's hidden gems, record stores, riverside trails, hole-in-the-wall diners where they shared milkshakes and secrets. Ethan's confidence was contagious, and Harrison found himself laughing more, speaking up, even flirting without the old fear creeping in. But Caleb's absence still haunted him. Late at night, when Ethan was asleep, Harrison would scroll through old photos, snapshots of him and Caleb at prom, at the lake, at graduation. Each image was a reminder of what he'd lost, but also what he'd gained. Caleb's courage had pushed him to this moment, to this life he was finally claiming. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local LGBTQ plus youth center with Ethan, Harrison met a teenager named Jamie, a shy kid with a mop of curly hair and a story too familiar. Jamie had been kicked out by his parents after coming out as gay. The center was his lifeline, a place where he could be himself without fear. Harrison saw himself in Jamie, the same quiet strength, the same buried pain. "You're going to be okay," Harrison told him, his voice steady. "It gets better, even when it feels impossible." Jamie looked at him, skeptical but hopeful. "How do you know?" "Because I'm living it," Harrison said, and for the first time, he believed it. That evening, Ethan suggested they attend a vigil for Caleb, organized by his sister in Willow Creek. Harrison hesitated. Returning to his hometown so soon felt like walking into a lion's den. But Ethan's hand in his was an anchor, and he agreed. The vigil was held in the town square, under a canopy of twinkling lights. Caleb's sister, Sarah, had set up a small memorial, photos, candles, and notes from friends. The turnout was larger than Harrison expected, a mix of familiar faces and strangers who'd been touched by Caleb's light. Sarah spotted him and pulled him into a hug. "He'd be so proud of you," she whispered. Harrison lit a candle, his hands trembling as he placed it among the others. Ethan stood beside him, a quiet presence, his warmth grounding. As people shared stories, Harrison felt the weight of his grief shift. It wasn't gone, but it was shared, carried by a community that loved Caleb as much as he did. When it was his turn to speak, Harrison didn't hesitate. Caleb taught me to be brave, he said, his voice carrying across the square. He showed me that love is worth fighting for, even when it's hard. I'm here because of him. The crowd was silent. But this time, it wasn't judgment, it was respect. A few people clapped. Others nodded. And Harrison felt a spark of hope. Maybe Willow Creek could change. Even just a little. Back in Richmond, Harrison started to build a life. He found a job at a local bookstore, a cozy place filled with the scent of paper and coffee. The work was simple, but it gave him purpose, a chance to connect with people through stories. Ethan encouraged him to write, something Harrison had always done in secret. Late at night, he poured his thoughts into a journal, poems, memories, dreams of a future where he didn't have to hide. One evening, Ethan surprised him with a date to a rooftop bar overlooking the city. The skyline sparkled, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Ethan raised a glass, his eyes locked on Harrison's. "To new beginnings," he said. Harrison clinked his glass, his heart full. "To us." But not everything was perfect. His parents were still struggling to understand. His mother called often, asking questions, trying to bridge the gap. His father was quieter, his texts brief but present. Harrison knew it would take time, but he was willing to wait. Then, a letter arrived from Sarah. Inside was a USB drive with a note. "Caleb left this for you." Harrison's hand shook as he plugged it into his laptop. It was a video, recorded a month before Caleb's accident. In it, Caleb sat in his messy bedroom, his grin as bright as ever. "Hey, Harry," he said, his voice warm. "If you're watching this, I'm probably gone. I just want you to know I knew. I knew how you felt, and I loved you too. Not the same way, maybe, but just as deep. Be you. Okay, be the guy I always saw." Harrison sobbed, the weight of Caleb's words washing over him. Ethan held him, silent but steady, as the video played on loop. It was closure, painful but necessary, and it gave Harrison the strength to keep going. The video changed everything. Caleb's words were a beacon, guiding Harrison through the fog of grief and guilt. He watched it again and again, each viewing chipping away at the walls he'd built around himself. Caleb had seen him, truly seen him, and that knowledge was a gift Harrison carried into every new day. Life with Ethan grew deeper, more vibrant. They moved in together, into a small loft in Richmond's Arts District, its walls covered in Ethan's paintings and Harrison's scribbled poems. Their mornings were filled with coffee and quiet moments, their evenings with debates over music and stolen kisses. Harrison had never known love could feel this free, this unburdened by fear. But the past wasn't done with him. One Saturday, as he and Ethan were unpacking boxes in their new home, Lily called. "Mom's sick," she said, her voice tight. They found a lump. "She's starting treatment next week." Harrison's world tilted. He drove to Willow Creek that evening, Ethan by his side. His mother was in the kitchen, looking smaller than he remembered, but her smile was as warm as ever. "I'm okay, Harry," she said, squeezing his hand. "Just a bump in the road." His father was there too, his gruff exterior softened by worry. They sat together, talking about the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the fear that hung unspoken. Harrison felt a pang of guilt for staying away so long. But his mother's eyes held no blame. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "And I'm glad you brought Ethan." It was the first time she'd acknowledged Ethan, and the gesture hit Harrison like a wave. Ethan, ever gracious, thanked her, his charm easing the tension. Over dinner, they talked about normal things: work, the weather, the town's new coffee shop. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Back in Richmond, Harrison threw himself into supporting his mother from afar. He called daily, sent care packages, even wrote her letters filled with memories of their happier days. Ethan was his rock, always knowing when to listen and when to distract him with a bad joke or a late-night drive. At the bookstore, Harrison started a queer book club, a safe space for readers to share stories and find community. Jamie, the teenager from the youth center, joined, his shy smile growing brighter with each meeting. Harrison saw Caleb in him, in the way he was learning to stand tall despite the world's weight. One evening, as the book club discussed a novel about love and loss, Harrison shared Caleb's video with the group. It was a vulnerable moment, but their support was unwavering. "You're honoring him," Maya said, her eyes shining. "Every day you live authentically, you're keeping his spirit alive." Inspired, Harrison started writing a memoir, pouring his story onto the page. It was raw, messy, filled with pain and hope. Ethan read every draft, offering feedback and encouragement. "This is your truth," he said. "Don't hold back." As his mother's treatment progressed, Harrison visited Willow Creek more often. Each trip was a step toward reconciliation. His father began asking about Ethan, small questions that showed he was trying. One day, he even joined them for coffee, his silence less heavy than before. But not everyone in Willow Creek was ready to change. At a town festival, Harrison and Ethan walked hand in hand, drawing stares and whispers. A group of old classmates confronted them, their words sharp with judgment. "You're not welcome here," one said, his voice laced with venom. Harrison felt the old fear creep in, but Ethan's grip steadied him. "We're not going anywhere," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. The crowd dispersed, and Harrison realized he wasn't the scared kid from high school anymore. That night, back in their loft, Harrison wrote a chapter about that moment, about standing up to hate with love. It was cathartic, a release of years of shame. Ethan read it and pulled him close. "You're unstoppable," he whispered. As summer turned to fall, Harrison's mother got better news. Her treatment was working. The family celebrated with a small dinner, and for the first time, Harrison felt like he belonged. His father raised a glass, his voice gruff but sincere. "To family," he said, his eyes meeting Harrison's. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Harrison's memoir took shape, each word a step toward healing. He wrote about Caleb, about the funeral, about the fear and freedom of coming out. He wrote about Ethan, the man who'd become his anchor, and about Willow Creek, a town that was both his cage and his cradle. The process was painful, like peeling back layers of skin, but it was also liberating. He was telling his story, not just for himself, but for anyone who felt trapped by silence. Ethan's art began to reflect their journey too. He painted a series inspired by Harrison's words, vibrant canvases of love, loss, and resilience. One piece, a portrait of two men under a golden sky, captured the moment Harrison first realized he was falling for Ethan. It hung in their loft, a reminder of how far they'd come. At the youth center, Harrison became a mentor to Jamie and others, sharing his story to show them they weren't alone. He organized workshops, inviting queer authors and activists to speak. The kids looked at him with awe, and he saw Caleb's spirit in their courage, their defiance, their hope. But life wasn't without challenges. Harrison's father was still grappling with his identity. Their conversations often stilted. One evening, during a visit to Willow Creek, his father asked him to take a walk. They ended up at the town's old baseball field, where Harrison had once played as a kid. "I'm trying, Harry," his father said, his voice low. "It's not easy, unlearning things I thought were true. But I see you're happy, and that's what matters." Harrison nodded, his throat tight. "I just want you to know me," he said. "The real me." His father looked at him, his eyes softening. "I'm starting to." Back in Richmond, Harrison and Ethan faced a new test. Ethan was offered a residency at an art institute in New York, a dream opportunity that would take him away for 6 months. The news hit Harrison like a punch. He was thrilled for Ethan, but the thought of being apart felt like losing a piece of himself. They talked for hours, weighing the options. "I don't want to hold you back," Harrison said, his voice breaking. "But I'm scared." Ethan took his hands, his eyes steady. "This isn't goodbye. It's just a chapter. We'll make it work." They spent the weeks before Ethan's departure cherishing every moment. They took a road trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, camping under the stars, their laughter echoing through the trees. Harrison wrote about it in his memoir, capturing the way Ethan's touch felt like home, even in the wilderness. When Ethan left, the loft felt empty, but Harrison threw himself into his work. He finished the first draft of his memoir and sent it to a small press in Richmond. To his surprise, they loved it. "It's raw, honest, and powerful," the editor wrote. "We want to publish it." The news was bittersweet without Ethan there to celebrate. They video called every night, sharing stories of their days. But the distance was hard. Harrison found solace in the book club, in Jamie's progress, in the community that had become his family. One evening, Jamie came to the bookstore, his eyes bright with excitement. "I got into college," he said, holding up an acceptance letter. "And I'm going to study writing. Like you." Harrison hugged him, pride swelling in his chest. "Caleb would have loved you," he said, and Jamie grinned, a spark of that same mischief. As winter approached, Harrison's mother finished her treatment, her prognosis hopeful. The family gathered for Thanksgiving, and for the first time, Ethan was invited. He joined via video call, his smile lighting up the screen. Harrison's father even asked about his art, a small gesture that meant the world. Harrison's memoir was set to be published the following spring. He dedicated it to Caleb, with a note, "For the one who saw me first." The book was more than a story. It was a testament to love, to courage, to the power of speaking up. He hoped it would reach someone like Jamie, someone like the boy he used to be. Spring arrived, and with it, the release of Harrison's memoir. The bookstore hosted a launch party, the shelves lined with copies of his book. Its cover a painting by Ethan of two hands intertwined against the sunset. The room was packed, friend from the book club, kids from the youth center, even Sarah and Lily. Ethan had flown back from New York for the occasion. His presence a warmth Harrison hadn't realized he'd missed so fiercely. As he read an excerpt, his voice steady and clear, he felt Caleb's spirit in the room. The audience listened, some in tears, others nodding in recognition. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Ethan pulled him into a hug, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." The book gained traction, earning reviews in local papers and even a mention in a national queer magazine. Readers sent letters, sharing how Harrison's story had given them courage. One came from a teenager in a small town, who wrote, "Your book made me feel like I could be myself one day." Harrison framed it, hanging it beside Ethan's portrait in their loft. Ethan's residency ended, and he returned to Richmond for good. They celebrated with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, under the same rooftop bar where they'd toasted to new beginnings. "I want to stay," Ethan said, his eyes locked on Harrison's. "With you? Here, building this life." Harrison smiled, his heart full. "I want that too." They started planning a future, maybe a house, maybe a dog, definitely more art and words. Harrison's parents came to visit, their acceptance growing with each conversation. His father even read the memoir, leaving a note in the margins. "I'm learning. Harry, I love you." Willow Creek was changing too, slowly but surely. The town square now hosted a small pride event, organized by Sarah in Caleb's honor. Harrison and Ethan attended, hand in hand, surrounded by allies and new faces. Jamie was there, reading a poem he'd written, his voice strong and clear. Harrison clapped until his hands hurt, seeing Caleb's legacy in every brave step forward. One evening, as they walked along the James River, Harrison stopped, pulling Ethan close. The sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, just like the moment Ethan had captured in his painting. "I love you," Harrison said, the words easy now, unburdened by fear. Ethan smiled, his eyes shining. "I love you too." They stood there, foreheads touching, hands clasped, the world fading away. Harrison thought of Caleb, of the video, of the boy who'd seen him first. He thought of the quiet kid he'd been, the one who'd learned to speak, to love, to live. And he knew, in that moment, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The river flowed on, carrying their story forward, a testament to love's resilience, to the power of truth, to the beauty of a life fully lived. Harrison wasn't the quiet one anymore. He was the one who spoke, who loved, who carried Caleb's light into the world. And that was enough.